welcome to the Podcaster Hour. This is very sad. This is the penultimate episode. I love the word penultimate. My name's Ian Answer Gray. Welcome to the Podcaster Hour. This is the show where we help you with your confidence in launching a podcast from your live shows using the power of Ecamm Live. Now, live video, I think if you're here, you understand the power of live video. But do you understand the power of podcasting as well? And we're going to be talking about that in today's show, that a lot of people are thinking about launching a live show. That's great. But there's so many other people out there who might not be in the position to watch a live show or just prefer podcasting. So why not do both? Why not launch a live show and a podcast from the same thing? Great to see you here. Thank you so much for watching. I can see lots of people watching live here. So let's go through who we've got. We've got Gary Bowen Michael saying, looking forward to another great live cast. Great to see you, Gary. Hope you're doing really well. We've got, I think this is Melissa watching on my group, saying, hiya, watching on my iPad from sunny Sandbach. And it is. I don't know where it is. What's the weather like where you are in the world? I'm just south of Manchester in the UK. Looking out the window, it is gorgeous. I know that spring is coming. We've got Jermaine Freeman saying, hey, hey, hey. We've got Thomas Job saying, hello from Berlin. How are things going in Berlin? We've got Kristen watching from the beautiful Colorado. We've got a question from John, which I'll come back to in a minute. Janine says, love the countdown. And thank you very much. I'm going to talk to you about the countdown in a minute. Tony is watching from sunny San Jose in California. Do you know what? This time, in fact, today, I would have been in San Diego in California at Social Media Marketing World. But as we all know, that kind of thing is not happening at the moment, unfortunately. We've got Adil watching from Pakistan. Awesome to see you, Adil. Hope you're doing really well. How are things doing in Pakistan? Kombucha is saying good morning to you. Obviously, it depends where in the world you're watching from. If you're in the US, it's morning. It's afternoon for me. We've got Yosia watching from the Philippines. I'm not sure what time it is. Is it quite early in the morning for you, probably? David is watching from Massachusetts. A little cloudy today. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. But yeah, life is good. Martin is watching on LinkedIn. So awesome to see you, Martin. Hope you're doing really well. Yeah, Kombucha says, oh, good day, rather. Might not be morning where you are. That's okay. And we've got John watching from Minnesota. Awesome. Great to see you here. What I'd love today is if you could ask your questions, ideally to do with podcasting or audio in particular, but they can be more general. They can be live video as well. But this is the Podcaster Hour, so it would be great to talk about that today. Oh my goodness. It is apparently 12:03 a.m. in the Philippines. That is very keen of you to be up at that time. Way past my bedtime. Awesome. That's the live element of the show. We're going to get on to the main bit. What we tend to do is we cut out the beginning bit for our replay audience. So that's what we're going to do now. So I'll be with you just after this. Hello, my name's Ian Answer Gray, and this is the Podcaster Hour. This is the penultimate episode. Today we're going to be answering your questions to do with podcasting and audio. So we'll be with you just after this.
Welcome to the Podcaster Hour from Ecamm, helping entrepreneurs, business owners, and live streamers launch a podcast with success using the power of Ecamm Live. Grow your audience and expand your reach, and learn how to plan, promote, produce, and repurpose your live show and podcast. Here's your host, Ian Anderson Gray.
Hello! Awesome to be here. My name's Ian Answer Gray, and I'm the host of the Podcaster Hour, if I can speak correctly, broadcasting on Ecamm Network, YouTube and Facebook, and also on my channels as well, because why not? Multi-streaming is an awesome thing to do. So today is the penultimate episode of the Podcaster Hour, and it's all about answering your questions when it comes to podcasting. And I'd love to know, have you launched your podcast yet? Do you have a standalone podcast, or have you launched a podcast from your live shows using some of the techniques and tips that I've been talking about on this show? Or maybe you haven't yet and there's something blocking you, something stopping you. I'm here to help you. This has been my plan all along. This is why I've come on the show, because I want to help you launch your podcast from your live show. So you've got a standalone podcast, or you've launched a podcast from your live show, or you haven't yet. And I'd love to know, pop it in the comments, whether you're watching live or the replay. I would love to know from you. Now, I can see we've got some awesome people watching. So this is an unrelated question. It's not to do with podcasting, but I had to answer this. So John is asking, love the countdown graphic. Is that available somewhere, or is it something you created yourself? And the answer to that is yes, I created that myself. Now, if you're watching the replay, you probably wouldn't see this. So I'll just play 5 to 10 seconds of the countdown so you can see what this is. This is not really to do with podcasting, but I'm a big fan of countdowns at the beginning. The reason I think countdown timers are great for live shows is it gives time for your live audience to join. It creates a bit of excitement. Now, if you're like Luria Petrucci, then you can dance along to it as well. I'm not really into that myself, but I think it just creates a bit of time. It also allows you to get into the chat and comment and things like that. I've done that myself. Now, what you can do in Ecamm is you can actually create your own countdown. So I can create, for example, this is a very simple one, but I've just added that there. So that's pretty cool. You can do that. And that's how I would start. So just maybe have a static image and then put a countdown on top of that. That's the easiest way to do it. Now, what I did is I actually found that countdown template. It was a paid one. I can't remember where it is. It's on one of these paid platforms where you can download templates. Come to me in a minute. So it's actually technically it's an After Effects template, which was a bit scary, but I managed to do it. That's there as an overlay on top of my image. And then what I did is got some music from Epidemic Sound. I uploaded it to this platform, Headliner. So let me just see if I can get this for you. Okay, headliner.app. And what you can do with headliner.app or .app is you can create a waveform. Let's see if I've got it here. I might not be able to find it. Would it be this one? Might not be this one. Let's have a look. No, it's not this one, but this will actually describe what I'm doing here. So this is a separate project. So what I've done is I've uploaded music and I've got Headliner to create the waveform here. Okay, so I don't know whether you can hear the music there, but you'll notice I've got a green background there. So the app that I use is ScreenFlow, and then I can remove that green background and make it transparent, and then put that on top of everything else that I've got. So I can have an image at the bottom, or you could add that in Ecamm as well. So you can have a transparent video as an overlay. So that is the answer to your question. Probably far too complicated, but you know what? I'm a geek and I love that kind of stuff. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Now let's have a look, see what else we've got here. Okay, so this is a question from Dawn. So I tried to go live via Creator Studio, but the issue was audio was out of sync with the video. I'm trying to get Facebook stars, so I have to stream through that. So I believe... Yeah, okay. Are you broadcasting via Ecamm, or you tell me how you're broadcasting? Or you're broadcasting on your phone? Because the thing here is, if you're broadcasting on your phone, sometimes it can get out of sync, I've noticed. So just a few little tips. These are actually Bluetooth headphones, but I'm actually plugged in at the moment because Bluetooth can cause a bit of out of sync audio as well with your video. But I don't know specifically about your question here because I'd need to know a little bit more, Dawn. But I always recommend restarting your phone, restarting your computer, and just closing down as many apps running in the background as possible and just start afresh. Do some tests first. So I'd always recommend go live to your profile first, just test things out first. But I would double check your microphone and your headphones, or if you're just going live from your phone, just check that out. I hope that helps. Okay. Deep T asks on YouTube, how do you live stream on so many different platforms simultaneously? So I'm using Ecamm Live and I've connected that to Restream. Now, Restream is a third-party tool, but what you can do in Restream is that you can create an event ahead of time. You can schedule the event to Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and also other platforms as well. Although technically Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn are the only platforms where you can schedule ahead of time. And then this is the amazing thing. In Ecamm, you connect it to Restream, you connect to your Restream account, and then all those events that you've scheduled ahead of time will appear there. So today, just 10 minutes before I went live, I connected to Restream in Ecamm, and then I selected the podcast hour event that I've already scheduled in advance. Because actually this week I'm going live to, I've got about four different live shows I've got scheduled. So I needed to make sure I got the right one. So that's how I do it. There are other ways, there are other services out there, but I use Restream for that. Kristen has a standalone podcast. I'd love to know more about that. And have you thought about starting off with a live show and turning that into a podcast? There are pros and cons with this, which we'll talk about later. So the advantage with just producing a podcast, a standalone podcast, is that you don't need to worry about video. And also ahead of time, you can plan this so you can batch record. So for example, today, I could say record 4 podcast episodes. If I was to do a live show, it wouldn't be so good to produce 4 live shows one after each other. So that's one advantage with having a standalone podcast. But the advantage with doing it the way I do it, which is live show into a podcast, is first of all, it gets done because you schedule that in advance. Second of all, you get the video, which you can repurpose for later. And it also, I think it's just really that repurposing thing. You've got the video, you've got the audio, you can turn it into a blog. There's all those cool things as well. Brad says, I have a well-established, I assume podcast, once a week podcast. If I want to add a live show, should that be added to the existing podcast or be a standalone show? And so that's a great question, Brad. And it's really up to you what you want to do. In my situation, I started from scratch. And so right from the beginning, I knew it was going to be a live show first, turning into a podcast, then turned into a blog. Those are the 3 stages for me. So live, podcast, blog. In fact, I should get a t-shirt with those 3 words on it because it's so awesome. Now, you already have an established podcast. So the question is it currently working really well? And if so, are you willing to tweak it so that you start off with a live show and turn it into a podcast? Now, the only way really is for me to know more about it and for you to have a think about that. But I just love the advantages of starting off with a live show is that you get it done, you get your live audience, you get your replay audience, you get your podcast audience, you get those 3 different audiences. You can also multi-stream to all those different destinations as well. So yes, you could do a separate show and turn that into a second podcast. Kind of depends on your situation. And Jermaine says, I've started my podcast, but looking to turn it into a video podcast. So that's great. Awesome. I'd love to know what it is you're thinking of doing there. Now, I want to just make a few points here. Now, a podcast in my mind is audio only. The live show element is live video, then it becomes a replay video. So those are both videos. I wouldn't really call them podcasts, but the next stage is then repurposing that into an audio podcast. And so you've got the video and you've got the audio and you're covering all those bases because, as I said at the beginning, some people love live video. Some people love watching replays of videos. Some people love watching on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook. But some people are not in the position to watch a live video. For example, you might be driving, you might be washing the dishes or going around the house cleaning or something like that. And so you prefer just the audio side of things. So you've got a whole other audience out there if you think about making it audio only as well. We've got Doc Rock in the house. Awesome to see you, Doc Rock. I hope you're doing well. And Matt is saying, hello, awesome people. Awesome. Wow. Okay. So John says, already launched my video podcast using Ecamm Live and multi-stream using Restream into Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. Awesome. I got some questions ahead of time, which I want to share with you. So this is the first question that I got, which is, what's the reason I should start with a video podcast? My audio only podcast is working just fine. And I've gone over this a little bit, but I just want to go over this a little bit more because if you've got a standalone audio podcast and it's working just fine, then why bother with all these other things? So just to go over that, the advantage with Ecamm Live, you could technically broadcast audio only. You could just broadcast with just a static image on the screen and make it all audio. You're broadcasting that live. Or, of course, you don't have to broadcast live at all. You could just use interview mode in Ecamm and just record it in your own time. So you don't have to start with live if you don't want to. But I think the advantages in starting live and then repurposing that into an audio is that you get the video for later for repurposing. So as I said, I'm a massive fan of using tools like Headliner because what I can do is I can then take little snippets from the live show or from the video and then turn that into little audiograms or little snippets, little videos. Now, if you've subscribed to the Ecamm Facebook page or the Instagram channel, then you'll see those little snippets that will pop up from time to time. Because this is a video show, you'll notice that we can do all of that. If this was just audio, it would make that much more difficult. People just love video. People love to see you podcasting is really, really intimate. There's something amazing about the fact that people plug you into their ears and listen to you for a long time. Podcasts are sometimes an hour long, but they will listen to you for that length of time. But video is almost more authentic because they're seeing you. You can't fake the way you sound, but you certainly can't fake the way you look either. I don't know. There's something about that I think about video that is awesome. But I will say, if your audio only podcast is working fine and you're not interested in video, then by all means just stick with that. But you can use Ecamm Live. You can record the video and turn it into a podcast and not broadcast live. But you still got that video that you can then repurpose. So I hope that answers your question. Next question, and then I'll come back to the comments. So do keep those questions coming. Okay, are there different ways you can incorporate live video into your podcasting strategy? Yes, there are. So my strategy, as I said, is you broadcast live. That is the repurposing engine, if you know what I mean. So that's how you start. And from that live video, you can create video snippets or video babies that you can break it up using a tool like Descript or Headliner. And you can upload that to YouTube and Instagram and IGTV, and you can turn it into a podcast and into a blog. That's the way I work. But the other option is to do the podcast as audio only or video, but after the episode has gone out, so say for example, your podcast episode goes live every Friday. So later on that day, why not then do a live video where you bring back your guest or you answer people's questions on that podcast episode topic? So that is great. You're building a community. Now, you could use something like Clubhouse, but the great thing about live video is that it's video and people can see you and they can hop on there and ask questions and you can answer them on there. It builds that community around your podcast because podcasting is amazing. I love podcasting. It's such an intimate experience. There's no other platform that people will listen to for the length of time that they do. But the thing is, with podcasting, it's much more difficult to build a community around it. Live video, you can build a community around it. And so that's what I would do. I would definitely recommend incorporating live video. Either start with a live video or add live video to the podcasting experience. Matt Hass says, Ecamm and the Rodecaster Pro are an amazing combo when you live stream video while you're recording a podcast, just saying. And I totally agree. Now, I've only just in the last 3 weeks got the Rodecaster Pro. You don't need a Rodecaster Pro to get started with podcasting and live video. I recommend just starting simple. The microphone I recommend is the Samsung QTU. It's a great microphone. It's a budget microphone. It's dynamic microphone, so the quality is pretty good. It's got an XLR output and USB, so you can plug it directly into your computer. It's a great way to start. But as you want to level things up, the thing about the Rodecaster Pro is that it has these amazing audio processing, so it makes your voice sound even better. You can add sound effects. It also has a record button, so if you want as a backup, you can record directly on your Rodecaster Pro. But this is where Ecamm Live comes in, and this is the game changer. So if you don't know about Ecamm Live and podcasting and this feature, you need to sit down for this because it is amazing. In Ecamm Live, if you go into the preferences and go to audio, there is now a section for ISO recording. So what this does, you don't have to have this. It will record the audio anyway, but with ISO recording switched on, it will record you and your guest and your video and your sound effects all on separate tracks, which means editing it for later is so much easier. So if you have a coughing fit or your guest has a coughing fit halfway through, you can edit that bit out. It doesn't matter because they're on separate tracks. So that's a game changer. Yes, by all means, use the feature on the Rodecaster Pro, and I definitely would recommend that as a backup. The system built into Ecamm Live is awesome. Let's have a look, see whatever we got here. Deep T says, I have a live video show, but no podcast yet. Could you please go over the steps for going from a live video show to a podcast? Now, that's quite a difficult job. That's a great question. Quite a difficult job because actually this is the 9th episode in the Podcaster Hour. And the previous 8 episodes, I've gone through all the different steps. But I'll go through it very briefly for you because it is quite simple. Basically, the first thing that you need to do is to plan what your podcast is going to be about or your live show is going to be about. Now, in your case, you've already got a live show, so you've done that. As an extra step though, what you've got to think about is there is an extra audience now that if you want to add to the mix. So if you're going live, you have two audiences. You've got the people from the future, they're your replay audience. So you've got to think about them when you're going live, but you've also got to think about your live audience as well. And you've got to keep them both happy. When you repurpose into a podcast, you've also got to think about your listeners, your podcast listeners. So if you're demonstrating something on the screen while you're going live, you need to be aware of your podcast listeners. So that's the first thing. Just plan that out. Second thing is how you then repurpose that live show into an audio-only podcast. Now, if you're using Ecamm Live, it's really easy. You've got the ability to record the audio, also the ability to record those as separate tracks, you and your guest. So you'll get those separate audio files. Now it's a case of editing that. There are loads of different tools out there. You could also hire a podcast editor. I started off editing the podcast myself. I used Adobe Audition. You'll need a little bit of time to get used to that, but that's what I used. That's a paid tool, obviously, because it's Adobe. But then there's another tool, there's Audacity. That's a free tool. Also, I had Colin Gray on the show, who is the founder of Alitu, alitu.com. Now, Alitu is great because it's a cloud-based audio editing tool. And so what you can do with that, it allows you to clip beginning and the end and edit bits out. It has audio processing. You can put the intro and outro as well if you want to do that. For example, you could hire a podcast editor to do that as well. Now, an optional thing here is you may want, and you may already have this on your live show, you may want to have an intro and an outro. If you have one in your live show, just make sure that the music and the voiceover, if you have that, works well for podcasting. Otherwise, get separate intros and outros that are audio, and then you can put those at the beginning and the end. Now you've got the MP3 of your podcast. Now you need to upload that to a podcasting host. So the service that I use is CAPTIVATE FM, but there are loads of podcast hosts out there. Do your research. I personally love CAPTIVATE FM, and I'm going to hopefully have Mark Asquith on the show next week. If you're around next week, we can ask some questions from Mark. There's loads of those services out there, but what that does is it stores your MP3 files. It creates the feeds that Apple Music and Google Podcasts and Spotify need to be able to allow people to subscribe to your podcast. So it hosts those MP3s, it creates the feeds, and also most of them will allow you to submit your podcasts to all those directories. And that's kind of it, except of course you've got to do things like promote your podcast and things like that. So I hope that helps. Preston says, is using the Zoom H4n for podcast streaming okay? So are you using that, Preston, as an audio interface? So are you outputting Ecamm into that and then recording it onto your SD card on your Zoom? You could do that, or I've got the Zoom, I've got the same one as you. I just used it as an audio interface, and I personally prefer just to record it directly, use Ecamm to save directly onto my computer as separate tracks. That's the way I prefer it, but you could use the Zoom as a backup in the same way as I use my Rode as a backup, just in case anything were to go wrong. Okay, so John says, I do a live podcast, JR's Coffee Shop podcast, that I use Ecamm and the Rodecaster Pro to multi-stream using Restream and then repurpose the audio, MP3 and video, VOD for later audiences. I typically get 20 to 30 live viewers and then 300 to 400 viewers afterwards. So take advantage of all the opportunities to reach your audience. Thank you for that, John. That's awesome. So there are different audiences. 20 to 30 live viewers is an excellent number. So you've got those live viewers, and then you've got the replay audience, which is generally a lot more. And then you've got other opportunities across all those different channels of the replay. And if you've got a podcast, you'll typically get a completely different audience listening to that. Question from DAS Productions. Question, I'm just starting my first podcast and I'm really pleased with the journey so far. So I hear people talking about podcast subscribers. Do I need to have a CTA to subscribe to my podcast? Thank you. Yes, you do. Absolutely, you need to do that. So you can encourage some of your live audience or your replay audience to subscribe to your podcast. And I do this every week. At the beginning and at the end of my live show, I say something like, and don't forget the Confident Live Marketing Podcast. All you need to do is go to iag.me/podcast to subscribe. Now, let me just show you actually I'm not saying that my podcast page is perfect. I'm always looking at ways to improve this, but this is my podcast page. This is iag.me/podcast for my Confident Live Marketing podcast. Now, this is a live show that becomes a podcast and then becomes a blog. And so I've got basically first up here, what this show's all about. I've got sponsors there. I've then got subscribe now. So I've got an easy way to subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, on Android, and all the other things. I also use Podchaser as a great podcast directory. So definitely check out Podchaser. It's like the IMDb of the podcasting world. And so I make it really easy. And then further down here, I've got the individual shows. So if I click on this one here, when I had Mark Asquith on the show, now this will probably take a while to load. I'll just go back here. But basically, this is a blog post. So I've got the title up there, I've got the description, got some timestamps. I've then here, if it decides to load, there we go, I've got the embed of the podcast player. What's cool here is on Captivate, by the way, is if I click on these timestamps, it goes to that point in the podcast. Then I've got the blog post here, and then right at the bottom, I've got the video as well. So there we go, right at the bottom. This is the video on YouTube. So yeah, definitely. So I kind of answered beyond what your question was, but absolutely, I definitely would agree that you have a CTA call to action there. Steve says, I did a podcast for 4 years on organic gardening. Awesome. And use Audition every week. I loved it. So you're not doing that anymore? Audition, I think Adobe Audition, if you have Adobe Audition and you're not afraid of learning it, my friend Mike Russell has amazing YouTube videos on how to learn how to use Adobe Audition. Check that out. Steve says, if your subject is more visual, like using video or photography related, am I wrong in thinking that wouldn't work well as an audio podcast? So it kind of depends. Thinking about my live shows, the Confident Live Marketing Show, I do talk about video, I talk about tech, I talk about mindset. So there are some times where it's a visual thing where it's a bit more difficult to turn that into a podcast. But do you know what? On the whole, it's been really successful. I had Annette McDonald, who is the founder of Easel. And Easel, if you haven't heard of it, is an amazing online graphics tool, similar to Canva, but in my opinion, better. So I had her on the show and she was demonstrating how to use the tool. But I found that I was able to describe what she was talking about on the screen really quite well, and it worked really well as a podcast. And you can always say to your podcast listeners, if there's a very visual one, you can say, once you've listened to this podcast, do go back and watch the video and you'll be able to see what we've been talking about in the show. However, if everything about your live video is very visual, you have to think, is it going to work as a podcast? You just have to think about that. And I think really only you can answer that question. Explanatory Live says, should your podcast have the same name as your YouTube channel? No, not necessarily. It depends what you're wanting to do. Yeah, so again, I'm talking personally. My YouTube channel is just called Ian Anderson Gray. It's my name. On my channel, I actually have a number of different shows. I have the Confident Live Marketing Show. I have the Podcaster Hour. I have a few other ones. And so what I would suggest that you do within your YouTube channel, you have a playlist dedicated to your podcast or the live show of your podcast, if that makes sense. And Doc says, Scott Bourne has one of the biggest photography podcasts for nearly 20 years. It can be done. Yeah, totally agree. It can be done, but it kind of depends on what you're trying to do. There can be a compromise. If you're going live and turning it into a podcast, there is a balance. So that's all I would say. It absolutely can be done. I do it, but just think about that. Matt says, I use Adobe Audition because it can automatically shorten the pauses between sentences. Amazing feature. Do other apps do that? That's a really interesting question. Interesting thing, Matt. Two things. Yes, there are other apps that do that. So an app that I've talked about on this show before is Descript. Now let me see if I can get Descript up on the screen because it is amazing. And if you haven't discovered Descript before, you need to discover it. So Descript.com, you can basically put video into it or audio, and it will then transcribe that into words. And then what you can do is you can then edit the words. If you, for example, you can delete words, you can change words, and it will then amend the audio or the video at the same time. For example, if you stumble over your words, if you go and a lot, there's an amazing feature in Descript that will remove all filler words. and remove pauses and things like that. It is amazing. So definitely check out Descript. I personally, because I'm a control freak, I preferred using Adobe Audition because I just wanted more control over it, but I found that it took more time. Descript is a quick and easy way of doing it. Adobe Audition gives you more control, but it is more fiddly. But you mentioned shorten the pauses, and this is an interesting point. I would just be careful that you don't overdo this, because sometimes silence and pauses are important. Now, if, for example, I pause like this, that's probably a bit too long. But if I pause like this and carry on with my sentences like that, I think that's okay. And actually, a little bit of silence within your podcast and within your audio isn't a bad thing. I think we need to embrace those a little bit more. So yeah, I hope that helps. And Matt says, my podcast name has the word podcast in it. Is that a bad thing? Show name, All Things YouTube Podcast. Yes, it's a really interesting question. I've been thinking about this a lot, because some people recommend that you don't put the name podcast in your podcast name, because it is obviously a podcast if it's not a podcast. What I do is, for the podcast, I call it the Confident Live Marketing Podcast. And for my show, my live show, I call it the Confident Live Marketing Show. So it's advertised differently. On YouTube, you could call it the YouTube show, the All Things YouTube show. And if it's a video one, and then on the podcast, you could call it the All Things YouTube podcast. I don't think it matters overly, but that's just something to maybe think about. So hope that answers your question. Awesome. So let's get on to the next question, which is, how can you eliminate the audio echo during interview mode? This is not directly a podcasting question, but interview mode. What's really important here when we're talking about podcasting, audio quality is so important. Now, you could probably notice I'm wearing headphones. I wear headphones on all my live shows because podcasting, the quality of the audio is everything. Now, I know everyone doesn't like wearing over-the-ear headphones. If you don't, then just wear very discreet earphones. But what's really important is that you get your guest to do that too. And that can often be a challenge, to get your guest to wear earphones. But if they do, it will remove that echo that you might get. Now, Ecamm Live has built-in echo cancellation, but still, sometimes there can be a bit of an echo there if your guest does not wear headphones. And so your audio, your voice is coming through the speakers on their end, and then their microphone is picking up that audio. Now, Ecamm Live will try and take away as much of your voice from the return feed, but it's just going to be much better if they wear headphones or earphones. And I put that in my notes. I've got a guest checklist that I send to all my podcast guests, and I ask them to wear earphones or headphones. Do they all listen to that advice? No, they don't, but I try my best. So I'm definitely a big believer in that. Really important stuff. Okay, next question. What's the easiest way to create a podcast from my live video? I don't have a lot of time to spend making podcast content. So earlier on, I answered the question of the full workflow. And if you're interested in the full workflow, one of the earlier podcaster hours was the full workflow of what I do. But if you want the quick and easy way of doing this, then there is this tool here called repurpose.io. Now, this is only if you really don't have that much time. What repurpose.io does, if you go live on YouTube or Facebook, repurpose.io will listen out to when you've done a live video, and then you can set up for it to then send that to your podcast host or upload to Dropbox or something like that. It's just a quick and easy way. So it will take that and then upload directly to your podcast host and do it that way. That would be one way, is repurpose.io. But remember, in Ecamm Live, you have the ability for it to save as an MP3 file. So you can then just take that MP3 and upload directly onto your podcasting host, CAPTIVATE FM or whatever it is. I would recommend editing it a little bit, the beginning and the end. You could use a tool like Alitu for that. But yeah, it really depends on how much editing you want to do. And when it comes to your live show, you need to think about that. How much editing do you want to do? If you don't want to do much, then just make it as close to the podcast episode as you can on your live show. So I hope that helps. Next question. How do you recover when everything goes wrong? With podcasting being so dependent on the audio piece and consistency, what happens if your live goes bad? First thing is, don't panic. It happens to all of us. It has happened to me. me. It's either going to be my fault, it's going to be my internet's fault, it's going to be my microphone's fault, it's going to be my guest's fault. Something occasionally goes wrong. And if everything goes wrong, then you just may need to re-record it. So I've had it when my guest had really bad internet speeds. It was all glitchy. We just had to cancel it and start again, reschedule it for the following week. And that's okay. Sometimes those things happen. I've had it when we had a lightning strike and the power went out halfway through. And actually, this is so funny. This was Amanda Robinson, who is a Facebook ads and bot expert, if you've not come across her. So she came on the show. I had a power outage because of a lightning strike. And then the second time, there was an internet blackout across the whole of the UK for the ISP that I use. And so the internet went down halfway through that. And so we had to reschedule it again for the following week. So sometimes that happens. What I would suggest to you is just have loads of backups. So if you have like the Rodecaster Pro, you can do a backup recording on the Rodecaster as well as on Ecamm. Also, just make sure you're doing lots of testing beforehand. Having a checklist, a tech checklist, will save so much time. So for example, I always check my audio. I just make sure that my levels are okay. I make sure that my guest's audio is okay. I will just record it, listen to it back, make sure everything is okay. Really important to do that. Just expect sometimes things will go wrong. The same way with video, things will go wrong. Just make sure you have a checklist there. Okay, final question on here, which is, since you have just finished episode 100, this is my Confident Live Marketing Show. I'm now on episode 105. What piece of advice would you give to yourself at episode 1? It's a really good question. So I hadn't really given this much time to think about. I think I was actually, because of previous experience, I think I was actually quite good to myself right at the start. And this is what I'd say to you, because I'm a recovering perfectionist. I'm going to admit it now. I procrastinated like nobody's business when I first thought of the idea of podcasting. And so what I did right from the start was give myself permission for it not to be perfect, for my camera not to be amazing, my backdrop not to be amazing, and just get started and learn through the process. And so that's what I would suggest that you do, is to start off with what you've got and learn as you go through. But in terms of what I'd say to myself, I suppose it would just be to share all the technical things that I've learned along the way. So for example, having a really good structure is so important. I now plan the structure of my live shows. I've tweaked that over time. That's really, really helped. That's what I would say to myself. Planning is everything. Make sure you have a really solid plan. But the other thing is consistency. It's if you are consistent every single week in going live and turning it into a podcast, you will learn from that experience and get better over time. If I listen to episode 1 or 2 of my podcast, I'm probably going to be cringing at that, but I've learned so much along the way. What is this, Doc? Remember, Janet had a wardrobe malfunction in the middle of the Super Bowl, just had 100 million viewers. You shake it and keep going. It's not the end of the world. Yes, exactly. So you just need to keep going. Actually, do you know what? This is what I would say to myself back at episode 1, is don't take yourself too seriously. Now, I'm very good at being a Brit, probably helps. I'm quite self-deprecating. I don't take myself too seriously, except I did because I wanted everything to be perfect. I was really worried about how people would judge me on my audio quality, or my background, or my camera. And the thing is, we love the tech. We want everything to be really cool. And I've spent a lot of time on all those things. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is you turning up, giving value, and being there. Your audience don't really care if you're using a Heil PR40 or whether you're using Elgato key lights or whatever. The most important thing is that you turn up and you deliver value. Now, all the tech, if you keep the tech simple, if you use a tool like Ecamm Live, which just gives you that professional quality and makes it easy for you, of course that's going to make a difference. But you turning up, being consistent, and being there for your community is so important. And so that's what I would probably say to myself. Well, I think that is it. I don't know whether there are any more questions, but just as we finish, I'd love to know what your next steps are going to be with your podcast. Have I convinced you to launch a podcast from your live show? I'd love to know. Adam says, is there any way to have more than 2 external audio devices connected to Ecamm? Oh, sorry, Adam. That was actually in my list of questions and I completely forgot to answer it. So thank you, Adam, for reminding me. In sound levels, you can have 2 devices. So the way you do that, let's just go to, just as I finish now, let's go to live demo mode. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. In this little window here, this is the sound levels window. So I've got my movie sound levels. I've got my Rodecaster Pro Stereo one there. I've got sound effects as well. So for example, if I play a little sound effects, what should I play? Some very kind of somber music there. So that's the sound effects, and then you've got interview mode there, system audio. But you can add another audio interface there. So the question is, can you add more than two? And the answer is no, not directly within Ecamm, but you can if you use a tool like Loopback, a similar tool to Loopback. If I just go to Loopback now, so Loopback is a paid tool from a company called Rogue Amoeba. So what you can do with Loopback is you can create your own audio devices. So what you could do here, for example, if I create a new one, so let's create a new virtual device. Okay, I'm going to call this test. And then what I'm going to do here, I'm going to add my MacBook Pro microphone. Just going to switch that off for now, just in case. Okay, so that's my MacBook Pro microphone. I'm also going to add, let's see what else I can add. Another interface, maybe the Rodecaster Pro. So hopefully, yeah, you can still hear me okay on that. So there we go. I've got those two things. Now this comes out as an output channel here. So this is called test. Now within Ecamm Live now, I should be able to, let's have a look. Now it's not there yet. Okay, but let's just go back. So I've created that new audio interface. Let's go to live demo mode again. Okay, so here in the sound levels, if I click on the downwards arrow here, you can see all those different audio interfaces there that I've got. Now the test one that I've created is not there yet, because what I think will need to do is I'll need to restart Ecamm and then it will appear there. So the great thing about Loopback is you can combine external audio interfaces. You could route the audio from Google Chrome or browser or from Zoom into there as well. So I hope that helps, Adam. So I think we're out of time. I think we are. I think that's it. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I'll see you next week. My goodness, it's gone very quickly today. So until next time, I encourage you to launch your podcast using the power of Ecamm Live. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks for watching the Podcaster Hour from Ecamm, helping entrepreneurs, business owners, and live streamers launch a podcast with success using the power of Ecamm Live. That's it for this week, but do tune in next time. See you soon, and toodaloo!